he's gonna get loud, and I apologize. He always does. And his girlfriend's on the porch, so you may hear a hen making some noise too. Sorry. In advance, sorry. What I want to talk about today is the benefits of weeds and composting. I have let my garden go to weeds. It's just one of those things. The heat got to me. I had some personal things come up. The work was overwhelming because I was doing it by myself, and I'm still doing it by myself. So it was a lot to take care of. I have a large garden, over 10,000 square foot, and yes, it's a lot. But instead of focusing on the negatives of having the weeds and the issues and the problems, I have sat there while I've been cleaning, and I've been putting all that positive into my garden instead of the negative, and I've been just telling myself it's okay. Everything's fine, because I figured out one of the main benefits for having a weedy garden is the fact that it's improving my soil. Now, if you think about that, easiest way to put this is I have hard red clay. No nutrients, just hard red clay. There's nothing there. It's just horrible, nasty soil. So as I've let these weeds go through, they've aerated. They've put their root systems out, and as I pull those roots out, I notice that soil around them are very fluffy. The area where I'm shaking the soil back in, nice and fluffy and smooth. So I have to say that that is a definite benefit to having weeds in your garden. Is it's going to aerate, it's going to put natural materials into, organic materials into your soil too, with all those root systems that you can't completely break out. And they're gonna rot down and be compost in the actual soil. So focusing on that, I think that's a great thing. Plus, I get a lot of free compost out of my garden right now. I live in an area where I cannot have truckloads come through. People don't deliver to me. I mean, I'm in the middle of nowhere. So we've talked about how some of these weeds are beneficial. With that being said, I also want to show you some of the other cool things about weeds. All right, it doesn't seem like much, but that's honeysuckle. And I've let it go wild all across my fence line here. I've let it go wild in lots of spots. And the reason being is because that free weed is very beneficial in a lot of different ways. Now, you do have to stop sometimes and just look at the other free stuff, like beautiful flowers. I think I have like 9 different shades of morning glories growing in my garden. You can buy morning glory seeds, but I have them in every shade from pink to purple to blue to white, and I have them in all sizes. Check out how teeny that one is. Okay, so see all of this that you're looking at? It fills 3 acres almost, and that is just wild blackberries and raspberries everywhere. I have come through and picked gallons and gallons and gallons out of here, and we eat them fresh. We eat them in smoothies. We make jams and jellies, and I make a bunch, cobblers, because, berries, you got to make cobblers. But yeah, free food. Okay, so I showed you some of the benefits of having weeds in the garden. Beautiful flowers, free stuff that's edible. I'm not going to go through all the medicinal prospects on my property. I have lots of things that grow, but if you're looking into finding food foraging out of your yard, out of your property, out of the woods, things like that, do a lot of research first. I'm not here to teach you that. I've done my research for a long time. If you have questions, I could probably try to answer them for you. That's the best I'm going to say, but I'm not here to teach about wild edibles. There are other channels that focus on that with people with more knowledge than I have. And that's where I learned, and I suggest just trying those out. But other than that, let's talk about compost. Now, I've cleaned a lot of my garden, and if you think about it, where does it all go? I pull up all these weeds and get all this stuff done. What do I do with it? Well, I fill wheelbarrows and I fill my compost bin. It's free compost. So I'm going to talk about some of the benefits about composting, what I do, how I do it, and what happens afterwards, because a lot of people don't quite understand compost. I myself am not an expert, but I have a lot of real good knowledge because I've done a lot of research. So you can't see it behind the zinnias back here, but I have a wheelbarrow completely full. I, in a day's time with work, will take 4 wheelbarrows over to my compost bins. And that's great. That's free compost. I will never get a truckload of compost coming through here. Like I said, they just don't deliver out in this area because we're so rural. And I can never produce enough compost for my actual garden. That's almost an impossible task to try to take on. So what I do is I use 2 bins, and I focus one bin for one season and the other bin for the other. And so I kind of explain it better over there. I'll show you what I mean. Let's go check out my compost bins. That's one of the leghorns. She flies over the coop and gets out all the time, and her favorite spot's in the compost. She scratches it up and eats the stuff, and I don't mind, you know, not a big deal. But it's really windy, so hopefully you guys can hear me. Oh, it's, super windy. What we're looking at here is my 2 systems. Now I do need to come through and mow because I've been focusing elsewhere. I haven't mowed around here very well. But what I do is I use this bin for everything that comes out of my spring and summer garden. And I use this bin for everything that comes out of my fall and winter. I rotate throughout the year so that all of this in this first bin, this will break down, and I can use that when I replant in the spring. And this one on the other side, I've already gotten rid of majority of the compost that's in there, and I've put that back into my garden already because that's for my fall amendments. But all of these compost bins are made out of pallets. It's a standard thing you see on most homesteads and garden areas, just pallets. 3 pallets hooked together, and then I found short pallets to go in the front. And that way when my chickens came through and they tried to, you know, scratch out all of this, these pallets blocked that. Otherwise, I had compost throughout my yard. Now, what do I put into my compost? A lot of stuff. You can see right now how full this one is with weeds. Let me show you what else is in there. Okay, this is the main compost bin. This is the one I'm focusing on this season. And you can see I've got some cucumbers in here. I saved these for seed, and they were too rotten to give to the chickens, so I threw them in my compost. Coffee filter full of coffee. I've got some basil that, you know, didn't make it the way I wanted, so I just threw it in here. But everything that I add in here does not have seed. The reason being is because if I put seed into this, it's then going to end up in my garden, and I'm going to have even more weeds. So anything that has seed heads on the top, I will break those off, and I will throw the rest of the plant in. Other than that, I mean, you can see some of this grass over here is growing because I pulled it, and it's so compacted in there with everything that's been going on that the root systems are still alive. So a good trick to that is just grab that stuff and pull it to the top when you see it. Let it dry out in the sun, and it's gonna die. The root systems will die, and it won't regrow. Okay, so now that you've seen the compost, let's talk about how I compost. I've done a lot of research for years on composting and trying to get as much as I can and do it as correctly as possible. Now I try to keep equal parts of green and brown. And my opinion is green is those things that break down and mush and kind of just disappear and you don't see them anymore. Where brown is the stuff like crispy crunchy that you still see in there, and it takes a lot longer to break down. So green would be considered anything that comes from my kitchen. If it's not fed to my ducks and chickens, it goes into the compost. So all my kitchen scraps, plants that I pull from the garden, rotten produce and vegetables, things like that. They will eventually just kind of disappear. And brown is going to be your fallen leaves, small branches and sticks, mulches, straw and hay. That all is considered a brown. Now, I'm kind of on the middle zone when it comes to grass clippings because you can put them in when they're green, but then they turn brown. So I just put them in anyway, and I kind of let them do their own thing. But most people consider grass clippings to be brown, I guess because of the way they dry out, but I've had them where they stay green in there as well. So it's kind of an iffy one with that, but as long as it's all added in the compost, it'll work out. Things that do not break down in my compost are going to be the avocado peels and pits. I'm sorry, he's always loud. I also have a hard time when it comes to corn products. Corn kernels themselves are fine, but husks and cobs and the plants themselves just are too fibrous and take way too long to break down. And so I don't try to put those in there, and I do not add bones or meat. Adding the meat in there is going to add a rotten smell, first of all. It's also going to attract things in there that you don't want, like predators and maggots. You don't want that in your compost. And the bones just don't ever really break down enough, ever. If you get a good microbe system going in your compost, you might eventually be able to do those on your own, but I just try not to because that's a lot to pick out in the end. And my compost doesn't smell. It's very fresh and nice, kind of has an earthy smell to it. Doesn't smell funky at all, and so I try not to put funky stuff in there. Now, I am a rule breaker when it comes to compost. I have been known to throw in the leftover vegetable soups. that we've made. I have been known to throw in some pasta sauces and leftover pastas, but a lot of those things, if my chickens don't get to them, other animals will, or they just break down into my compost as well. I add a lot of cardboard, I add a lot of paper, I add a lot of newspaper, things that I get, like my kids' schoolwork goes in there, drink holders. I don't do pizza boxes because I don't put anything with oils in my compost because it goes rancid and it hurts the microbes. So I try not to put anything that has oil or fats on it. But yeah, I put a lot of stuff in my compost, and the great thing about it is a majority of that is free. I mean, I pay for the straw for my coops, but when I take it out, I have to do something with it, so that goes into the compost, so that's free. Kitchen scraps, it's just the waste that we're not using, so that goes in there. And a lot of the times it's like cardboard boxes that have come in from products we've purchased or kids' schoolwork, things like that. It's all stuff that's going to get thrown away anyway, so I try to add it in and compost it. Now, I don't do eggshells because I save my eggshells differently. You can look at that video if you want on how to use your eggshells for your chickens in your gardens. I personally just don't add them into my compost. They do take a long time to break down, and so I just reuse those in different ways. You can start compost piles any way that you need to. I started mine with cardboard on the bottom, and I didn't use plastic or landscape fabric because I wanted it to eventually, after creating the weed barrier, to eventually just break down and be part of my compost to begin with. So I just laid cardboard down. I can tell you, rule of thumb, when it comes to cardboard, I don't use anything that is plastic coated. If it's very shiny on the outside, I don't know what's in those inks, and I don't want that chemical in my compost. And I remove all the tape and staples because I don't want that in my compost either. So those are things that you need to look forward to when you start to compost on your own. Now, the reason why I'm talking about compost is because I was asked about it. I've been friends with somebody on YouTube for a while now, and that's Lydia over at Best Yet Journey, and she asked about the compost, and I'm hoping by showing this and talking a little bit, it'll help her. She's new to gardening and new to canning, so go check her out if you want to help her out, and leave some comments over there. I'm sure she would really appreciate any help she can get from everybody, although I don't think she needs it. I'm just going to be honest, that girl is rocking over there. I mean, way better than I ever did in my first year gardening, and she's canning before I even ever attempted. So I think she's doing an excellent job, but just go give her a little love, see what she's all about. On top of that, let's just talk about real quick what happens when the compost comes down to the breakdowns and reusing in the garden. All right, so I will never have enough compost to put all over my entire garden, so I work in small batches. When I go to plant a seedling, I dig a big hole, I throw part of my compost in, I put the seedling into it, cover it back up, and that's how I add compost to my garden. Now with my raised beds, I will add compost to it and spread it out, and that's perfectly fine with me. But I planted a lot of plants this year, and if I spread compost over all of my rows, it's over 10,000 square foot out there, I would never have gotten it covered. So I just work in bits and pieces. I know from personal experience with compost, you know it's broken down enough when your final turn, there's nothing left to it. Meaning you're not seeing big chunks of things, you're not seeing large amounts of straw that still needs to break down, stuff like that. It has turned to a black garden gold. And that's when I like to use my compost. I do not cover it in the winter. I leave it very open because it still breaks down and it can still get moisture from the air and do what it needs to. But I try to not waste anything when it comes down to reusing my compost. So I use it in small batches. I take care of it as much as I can, and I use it in 2 parts because I grow in 2 seasons. And that way both bins will fill up throughout the year, and when I go to plant one season, I have a bin ready, and when I go to plant the next, I have another bin ready. Just part of what it is when it comes down to composting. I hope this is informative enough to help some of you out who don't know a whole lot. There are starters that you can buy. I've never used one. I've seen people use them, but you can buy a bag of a compost starter and throw that onto your compost, and that puts all those organisms in naturally. I don't. I mean, I just throw it into my bins, and it does what it needs to. I'm so sorry about the rooster. But it'll do what it needs to as long as I focus on it and do the work to help it. You can't just set it there and walk away. You have to turn it. You have to make sure it's moist. You need to keep adding to it constantly and breaking it down. So, again, I hope this helped. If you're new to the channel, hit the subscribe button or leave a like or a comment. I would love to know how you compost, or if you do compost, or if it's new to you. And I really want to hear about those starter kits. I don't see enough about them, and it just piques my curiosity. So if you've used those starter kits, please leave some comments below. It'll probably help out somebody else who's looking too. And maybe as I move forward into my next ventures with composting, which is going to be a larger area, and with my chickens, maybe that'll help me out too. So thank you guys for stopping by, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.